Hello, this is Steve, the anchor tester from SV Panope. I'm back out in the water with a new test anchor. This was sent to me by the folks at Ultramarine West. It is a 46-pound stainless steel Ultra anchor. Notice that I am using 2 shackles to attach the chain to the anchor. My preference would be to use a single shackle, but that's not possible due to the small round hole in the anchor's shank. We can see here that the shackle pin ear is interfering with my bulwark. Now it's probably just unique to me. I custom built this bulwark for a different anchor and with a single shackle, and it's never been a problem. But this is the second anchor that I've tested that requires 2 shackles, and like the other, it hangs up when the anchor is deployed. The anchor does fit my bow roller perfectly, and it does initiate the launch just by releasing the windlass. However, as you can see here, I have to fiddle around and eventually give it a little kick to get that shackle pin to pass by my bulwark. Okay, let's get down to business. We are in my standard sandy mud bottom. I am in 26 feet of water. The bow roller is 4 feet above water. With 105 feet of road, that results in a scope of 3.5 to 1. The boat's now backing down at 2 knots for the initial set. Be advised that my test protocol here is not about proper anchor setting technique. I am purposely backing up faster and harder to simulate a worst-case scenario for these anchors. In any case, the anchor dug in immediately. Here I'm making sure the anchor is set with 250 pounds of reverse thrust. Now the boat is passing overhead at 3.5 knots to simulate a very aggressive wind or current reversal. We can see that the anchor remains mostly engaged as it rotated around, and it did bring the boat to an abrupt halt. Unfortunately, the camera became fouled and stayed fouled until the anchor released from the seabed on retrieval. So with a bit of mud and the seaweed cleared off, it's time for the next test. It's basically the same thing, same location, same depth, but we're at 2.5 to 1 scope. Much shorter. We're using 75 feet of road. This road, by the way, is 3/8 inch Triple B chain. Using all chain. I do use a short snubber, however, to keep the chain from knocking the paint off the bow of the boat when I drive up overhead. So that was the initial set with a 2-knot back down. Took a little bit longer to bring the boat to a stop as the 3.5 to 1 test, but that was very good. A very quick stop. I'm holding 250 pounds of thrust for 30 seconds. That noise was the chain dragging over the camera apparatus as I pass overhead for the reset test. It sure looked to me like the anchor rotated and remained engaged. However, the camera became sort of upside down. We're looking up right now, and we can tell by the stuff going by and the sound that the anchor is still dragging, and it drags quite a long distance. The anchor is providing very little resistance, and it only resets after I chop the power. It's too bad we didn't get to see exactly what was going on there. Maybe we give it a pass. Maybe there was a unlucky piece of seaweed? Not sure, we just didn't get to see. In any event, it has now re-engaged the seabed and is holding the 250 pounds of reverse thrust nicely. On retrieval, we find a bit of mud and a fair amount of seaweed attached to the anchor. I'll mention that it is midsummer and there is more weed in the water and on the seafloor than any of my other tests I've done to date. Next test is my so-called deep set test. We're in the same sandy mud bottom. Scope's back to 3.5 to 1. And for this one we don't do any resetting, no back and forth, just pull as hard as I can. Initial set is textbook. Pick out a piece of seaweed, keep your eye on it. That'll help you figure out if this anchor is moving or not. Ideally it would not move much. And here we start off with 150 pounds of thrust. I hold these power settings for a 30-second count each. Be patient with the turbidity. in a minute here, it clears out and we get a better view of things. Up to 200 pounds of thrust. In the past, I used to conduct this deep set test by transferring the rode to the rear of the vessel. That was when I had an old fixed-pitched propeller, and I really could only get good thrust in forward. And it was really good. It was about 910 pounds total that I could achieve with that arrangement. Now this new arrangement is much better for my back. I can just pull in reverse. I don't have to manhandle the rode. Unfortunately, this engine and propeller combination doesn't pull quite as hard. So take that into consideration as you analyze all this. We're at the 250 pound thrust setting. The piece of seaweed that I picked out in the lower part of the screen, it's only moved a couple inches so far, maybe 6 inches. Still see some of the shank. There's 310 pounds of thrust. Ideally, we'd see anchors not move much and descend and basically disappear. This 370 pound setting is 2500 RPM on my engine. £430. My piece of seaweed, I'm going to say it's moved a foot so far. Don't see any heaping going on. What I call heaping is when an anchor is not really penetrating. It's just sort of scooching along and it's lifting seabed up into a pile kind of above and behind the anchor. Maybe we don't call it heaping. That's just what I've always said. And when an anchor does that, it's a sure sign that it's likely not going to have high holding power. But that's not the case here. This anchor is getting less and less visible as it has inched forward a bit. One of the rare fish that I've filmed swimming by there. And we're back up to, or we are up to 610 pounds of thrust. Just one more power setting increase. And now people have asked me, and it's a good question, what does the thrust equal to in terms of wind? And I don't know the answer. There's lots of variables, could have different waves, the boat could be surging differently, hunting back and forth. But I'll put out my best guess, and that is at the max power here, which we'll see shortly, I'm going to say it's 40 to 50 knots of wind for my boat. That's my guess. And here we are. We're at the final power setting. It's producing 680 pounds of thrust. I hold this final one for a 60-second count just to make darn sure that that anchor is done moving, and I'm just going to stay right where it is. I can still see just the very top of the shank. Now I don't see any shank. So this is as good as it gets. This is just exactly what you'd want to see. No doubt this anchor will hold more than I can pull. Certainly if I had a bigger boat or a boat with a bigger engine, I would pull harder. But this is the most we get, and that's what we have. For this next test, I've got the camera mounted on my simple down view apparatus. It's much better for the repeated resets I'm going to do. We're at 3.5 to 1 scope, sandy mud bottom. Here's the initial set. Each and every time I'm going to have the boat oriented correctly and pull back with 250 pounds of force. And then I pass the boat up overhead at 3.5 knots. You can see the chain whizzing by there in the lower part of the screen. And the first reset. Looks like the anchor stayed mostly engaged, just pivoted and stopped the boat immediately. Second reset, we get a backflip. I like to see that occasionally just to verify that the anchor will reset and not become clogged, and it does. But generally this anchor doesn't seem to do too many of the backflips. It likes to just rotate and stay engaged. That sound was the anchor chain dragging across the anchor. Here's the third reset, and what I believe happens here is the camera tether is sort of captured by the seabed. I've got the tether attached near the crown of the anchor. In any event, I can hear that the anchor is not moving. Here's the fourth reset. That worked out just great. I've got the anchor the boat turned around, and with a little bit of a jerk, the anchor moves a bit more, and the camera gets free. Here it is. Fifth reset, same story. Captured tether, camera gets pulled directly down into the seabed. The anchor did reset very quickly. Sixth reset. Camera becomes free. Anchor moved a few anchor lengths. And then resets and holds the boat nicely. Seventh reset, fouls the camera once again. Eighth reset, same story. Boat is now spun around, and I'll begin pulling backwards. There's about a 2-knot jerk, and the anchor moves a bit more, and it moves enough to free the camera once again. Ninth reset, another fouled camera. The camera stays right at the surface, so we can see that sand there, nothing's moving. 10th reset. This is the longest drag out of all of them. We don't get to see why, but the anchor does eventually set and stops the boat abruptly. I was still moving pretty good when that finally set. I've got it spun around, giving it a 2-knot jerk, and holding 250 pounds of thrust. No movement. Here's the anchor on retrieval. I was kind of hoping that this highly polished stainless steel surface would allow the mud to just sort of slough off, but unfortunately that's not the case. I feel that this surface adheres mud about the same as galvanized steel. In any case, I don't believe it is affecting the performance of the anchor. I don't notice fouling, and the performance of the anchor remains consistent. Last test is at my sand and gravel site, still in 26 feet of water, 3.5 to 1 scope. And I mentioned earlier the excessive amount of weed. Well, this place really showcases that. There is more weed here than I have ever seen. I've been testing a few other anchors this summer, and at this site, it's actually proving to be a bust. It's extremely difficult to test here. This anchor does set perfectly initially, The initial drift down was solid, and now it's holding 250 pounds. Here is a reversal, and the anchor, the camera becomes fouled, but we can listen and hear that the anchor does not reset. It just keeps on moving. Anchor still moving slowly. Up top side, I don't know what's going on. It's behaving differently. I mean, I can tell there's some force required to move it, but I don't know why. But it does keep moving. I got to keep quite a bit of power on to keep it moving. It's acting like it's suddenly become really, really heavy. And indeed, that's what's happened. Upon retrieval, I find it just a truly massive ball of weed. Take a look at that safety wire closely. It's the safety wire that is fixing the shackle pin. You'll notice that it is between the shackle and the fluke, and it's jammed. I was trying to move that shackle down and it won't move. There's just not enough clearance. Now the fix for this was simply to install the safety wire up higher on the side of the shackle. Now it's vulnerable to being moved downward if it runs into a rock or something, so it's not ideal, but it does solve the problem. And I did do all the testing of this video with this safety wire in the proper position. Now anchors that are designed to have a shackle in the end, they have a slot typically, and this problem is eliminated by that because the shackle pin goes through the chain link rather than the anchor. This anchor, I believe, was designed specifically in mind to have a swivel, and it's designed by the same people, the Ultra manufacturer people. They have a special swivel. I don't like swivels. I just like to bolt or shackle stuff directly to chains. In any event, this solves the problem. I like to curl the pigtail of the safety wire into a nice curl so it doesn't catch any flesh and cause a wound. But yeah, that solves the problem. Things are nice and free. I did get a chance to weigh this anchor. The manufacturer claims this anchor is 46 pounds, and on my scale it is 46 pounds. I did lay the anchor on its side and positioned it dead level with the tip on the scale, and that weight was 16 pounds, or a tip to total weight ratio of 35%. Now, of the top tier anchors that I have tested, and I certainly consider this Ultra to be among them, the tip to total weight ratios ranged from a low of 20% to a high of 50%, and I do notice a correlation between the speed at which an anchor sets and this ratio. Last thing we'll talk about is the construction of this anchor. It's the only stainless steel anchor I have tested, and it's really the only stainless steel anchor I've ever used. And I've waxed on in previous videos about how I really like seamless construction. I don't like voids, crevices, cracks. I don't even like anchors that are disassemblable. If they're just going to remain on the bow, I just assume they were one piece. Well, this anchor is as close to one piece as I've ever seen. They have welded every lap, every joint, and very finely polished all the welds out. And it's as if this has been sculpted out of a piece of stainless steel and highly polished. Now the shank is hollow, and that's done to keep the weight down so that we can have proper balance. I've done some basic shank strength calculations in the past, and I'm not going to do that here. The hollow structures are far beyond my engineering capability to predict strength, but my gut feeling, feeling it, looking at it, it's plenty strong. We don't have any reports that I know of these things bending in the field. It brings up another question, and that is stainless steel an appropriate metal for an anchor? Some people will say no stainless below the waterline. We do know that stainless can have crevice corrosion issues above the waterline. Sailboat rigging is frequently replaced. Even if it looks pretty good, there might be some cracking going on that are not detectable. I'm not a metallurgist. I do know that there is very few cases of stainless steel anchors failing in the field. I think if there was significant corrosion issues, and these things failing, I think they'd show up. There's been stainless anchors in use for decades, so I would trust this anchor. In fact, I'm trusting this anchor right now. As I edit this video, I'm aboard Pano Bay and it's blowing 25 out. I'm getting blown around in these blasts of gusts, and there's a lee shore right behind me, and I feel completely secure. All right, that's all I got for this Ultra. I want to give a huge thank you to all the people that have donated via Patreon and PayPal. If you want to do the same, look in the description below. You'll find links to that. As always, anchor safely and so long.